Sarah, I can't breathe, babe. Seriously.
Yeah, that's when you do and you choke me.
Sarah.
This woman zipped her boyfriend in a suitcase, leaving him to die. This happened when a seemingly harmless game of hide-and-seek took a deadly turn. What began as laughter ended in terror. A man trapped, pleading for his life, and a woman filming his desperate cries. This is the chilling story of Sarah Boone, the woman behind the suitcase murder that shocked the world. Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres were once a couple who seemed to share an undeniable bond. They laughed together, shared quiet moments, and loved each other deeply, at least at the start. Their relationship had its sparks of sweetness, those moments when it felt like they were just like any other couple, dreaming of their future together. But, as many relationships go, what looked beautiful on the outside quickly began to unravel behind closed doors. In the early days, Jorge's love for Sarah seemed genuine. He was protective and affectionate, and there was a sense of trust between them. Sarah, too, felt secure in his arms, but like many who have suffered hardship, she had her fears and scars from a past that she couldn't shake. Jorge, despite his warm exterior, had his demons. His history was tainted with brushes with the law. Multiple arrests for domestic violence against Sarah painted a picture that was far from the loving relationship they tried to portray. Sarah was no stranger to these darker sides of Jorge's personality. She had been his support, bailing him out of jail on several occasions, 4 times to be exact. She believed things would be different every time, and that they could turn things around. But the pattern repeated itself, and the trust that once seemed solid started to crumble. Each time Jorge was arrested, Sarah's heart broke just a little bit more. It was as if she couldn't escape the emotional chains that bound her to him. But it wasn't all just one-sided. In 2018, Sarah herself was arrested for allegedly strangling Jorge during one of their many explosive fights. It was a dark chapter in their love story, one that reflected the toxic, destructive nature of their relationship. There was something magnetic between them, but it wasn't healthy. It was a bond formed in chaos, and both of them were unable or unwilling to break free from it. Despite the arrests, the fights, and the fear that loomed over them, Sarah and Jorge always found their way back to each other. Their love was messy and flawed, but it was theirs. That was until one fateful night in February 2020. A seemingly ordinary game would change everything. But was it truly just a game, or was it something far more sinister? Sarah and Jorge's final night together was a sharp turn from the usual. What started as a playful moment between two people who seemed to love each other ended in tragedy, and the shocking events that followed were anything but predictable. How did a simple game of hide-and-seek spiral into a horrifying crime? It started like any other night. Sarah and Jorge, after sharing a bottle of wine, were laughing together, enjoying the rare moments when the world felt light. Maybe it was the alcohol, or perhaps it was the weight of their ongoing issues that pushed them to find some relief in something as innocent as a game. But at this moment, something shifted. What began as a light-hearted idea quickly turned dark. The game they decided to play that night, hide and seek, but not the way most of us play it. Sarah, perhaps trying to ease the tension in their lives, came up with the idea of hiding Jorge inside a suitcase. At first, they were both laughing, enjoying the absurdity of it. Sarah said later in her statement that they thought it would be funny, just a simple, harmless prank. But even amid their laughter, something felt off. Could a simple game cause such a horrifying outcome? Jorge, small in stature and weighing only 103 pounds, fit easily into the suitcase. Sarah zipped it up. She thought it was all in good fun. Jorge, however, wasn't laughing anymore. As the minutes turned into hours, what was supposed to be a fleeting joke became something far more sinister. At some point, Sarah went upstairs, likely tired from the evening's events. She fell asleep, unaware, But Jorge wasn't free. He was trapped inside the suitcase, unable to breathe, suffocating. The weight of the bag pressing down on his chest, combined with the lack of air, quickly turned what was once a joke into a deadly situation. Sarah awoke the next morning, and the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Her boyfriend is still in the suitcase. She immediately checked on him, and sadly, Jorge wasn't breathing. The man she had loved and fought for was dead. But the story she would tell the police and the way she presented the events would leave everyone questioning her role in his death. Sarah immediately called her ex-husband Brian Boone on the phone, informing him of the situation. Brian then advised Sarah to calm down and immediately call 911 to report the case. This is their conversation.
Is this a police or medical?
My boyfriend is dead.
Okay, send a line for the fire department. Do not hang up.
All right, great. Now tell me exactly what happened there.
My boyfriend and I were playing last night, and I put him in a case and we were playing, and like kind of hide and seek kind of thing. So I fell asleep, and I woke up, and he was dead in the suitcase. So I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened.
Right, okay, what's your apartment number?
3.
Apartment 3?
Yes, like he has like blood coming out of his mouth, and I don't know if like he had like an aneurysm or what happened.
Right, okay, all right, okay. Listen, we're getting help out there too. Okay, is he hanging from somewhere or what, ma'am?
No, I pulled him out of the suitcase. I tried giving him CPR.
Okay, so he was in a suitcase?
Yes, and I fell asleep.
Okay, how old is the boyfriend, ma'am? 42-year-old male. All right.
The police arrived at the scene, taking account of everything that happened. Witness statements were taken from both Sarah and her ex-husband. But was Sarah truly the victim of a tragic accident? Or was there more to the story than she was willing to admit?
I fell asleep. When did you do CPR? This morning, when I found it. Before you called? Yes! 1 o'clock right now. I was awake, but I actually got out of the bed at like 12:30ish, whatever. So I came downstairs, and I was like, oh, he's in the suitcase still. And that's when I found him, and I took him out, and I tried doing CPR, and then I called him, and then I called you guys.
Did he get here before the fire department got here?
Who?
Your husband or your ex-husband?
Yes.
Okay.
The truth began to come to light, but not in the way anyone could have expected. Sarah claimed it was a tragic accident, nothing more than a moment of poor judgment during a drunken game of hide-and-seek. But something about her story didn't sit right with investigators. It was too rehearsed, too perfect in its simplicity. The authorities decided to dig deeper. The police asked Sarah to hand over her phone for investigation, which she did without resistance. But what they found on it was far from what she expected. A video recorded just hours before Jorge's death would soon expose the chilling reality of that night. In the video, Sarah could be heard laughing, her voice laced with an eerie sense of amusement. It was hard to believe that someone laughing in such a manner could be dealing with a tragedy. But what she said next sent shockwaves through the investigation.
Sarah.
For everything you've done to me.
Sarah.
For everything you've done to me.
Sarah.
You.
Sarah.
You.
Sarah.
Stupid.
Sarah.
That's my name. Don't wear it up.
Sarah. I can't breathe, babe. Seriously.
Yeah, that's when you do and you choke me.
Sarah. Sarah.
Her words were not a joke, not a playful remark. They were a cruel reminder of the violent dynamics that had simmered beneath the surface of their relationship. Questions began to emerge. Could this truly have been an accident? Could someone so seemingly remorseful in the aftermath also be the one who brought about such an end? But there was still so much left to uncover. Why had Sarah allowed her boyfriend to remain trapped for so long? As the evidence mounted, the case took a dramatic turn. Could this be a case of a woman pushed to the edge, acting out of anger and revenge? Or was Sarah Boone far more involved in Jorge's death than she was letting on? As the case of Sarah's actions grew more complex, it was time for her to face the consequences of what happened that night. The trial that followed was nothing short of a spectacle. It wasn't just about the brutal act of suffocating a man inside a suitcase. It was about what had led up to that moment. The courtroom was filled with palpable tension. On one side, the prosecution presented a damning narrative, supported by the shocking evidence from Sarah's phone. The videos, with their disturbing content, painted a picture of a woman who had been fully aware of the terror she was inflicting on Jorge. The laughing, the mocking, the refusal to let him out. It all suggested intent. The prosecution argued that Sarah had orchestrated Jorge's death in a moment of rage, fueled by years of jealousy and resentment. On the other side, the defense tried to paint a different picture. They argued that Sarah had been a battered woman, victimized by a history of abuse at the hands of Jorge. They pointed to Jorge's arrest record, the accusations of domestic violence, and the emotional toll of living in a toxic relationship. The defense tried to claim that Sarah's actions were not premeditated, but were instead a result of years of emotional and physical suffering, culminating in a moment of impulsive and tragic mistake. But as the days of the trial wore on, the story only became murkier. Sarah Boone, once so calm and collected in her initial police interview, began to unravel under the pressure. The defense's argument of her being a battered woman fell apart when the jury heard the full extent of the evidence. It wasn't just about physical abuse. It was about a woman who, by all accounts, had been complicit in her suffering and who had enabled the very cycle of violence she claimed to escape. However, the judge instructed Sarah to show the jury how Jorge was able to get into the suitcase and the method used to place him inside. Sarah demonstrated the process clearly as seen in the video.
All right. Miss Boone, can you demonstrate for the jury where Mr. Torres' head was and how his body was positioned in the suitcase, if you don't mind?
His back was this way and his head was here.
All right, and then is it fair to say his feet are kind of down here, which would be the front left corner from their perspective in the jury box?
Yes.
And then his knees are kind of tucked up towards his face?
If I remember correctly, yes, that's the position.
Okay.
The case continued for months, with Sarah facing issues with her attorneys. It all began at the start of the case when her first attorney entered the courtroom, confident and prepared to fight for her freedom. However, behind closed doors, tension began to brew. Sarah dismissed advice, argued over every detail, and treated legal strategy like a personal battleground. One clash led to another until the lawyer couldn't take it anymore. They quit. Then came the next attorney, and the same pattern repeated, with Sarah's attorneys quitting 8 times. One by one, Sarah's legal defenders abandoned the ship, each leaving with a similar story. Working with her was impossible.
Derogatory berating of my services in this case, I can't effectively represent her. She doesn't trust me. She calls me a dud, I think, a buffoon, on and on and on and on. And no one should have to endure that type of derogatory comments and expect to effectively represent someone, especially in a murder case.
The judge later ruled that Sarah had to represent herself in court. For the first time, she was forced to confront the reality of her actions and the way she had manipulated her own story. When asked about the videos, she claimed that she didn't remember recording them, but the jury had already seen enough. The coldness in her voice, the lack of remorse, and how she trivialized the horror of Jorge's final moments didn't align with her defense. As closing arguments loomed, the weight of the evidence was undeniable. The jury was faced with a stark choice: to believe that Sarah Boone had been pushed to the edge by years of abuse, or to acknowledge that she had intentionally caused Jorge's death in a moment of spite and rage. The courtroom was on edge as the final arguments were made. The room was silent as the jury filed back into the courtroom. Sarah Boone sat at the defense table, her face a mask of uncertainty. The moment she had all been waiting for had finally arrived. The verdict. The jurors had deliberated for hours, weighing the evidence, the testimonies and the heart-wrenching videos of a man in his final moments. The atmosphere was electric. No one in the courtroom could deny the gravity of the decision about to be made. Would Sarah Boone be sentenced to life in prison, or would the jury find her guilty of something less severe? As the foreman stood, a hush fell over the room. The jury's decision was announced.
The court has had the opportunity to review the evidence and testimony that was presented at trial. The victim impact statements presented here today, the statements of character witnesses both orally and in writing, Dr. Harper's report and testimony, the defendant's testimony, pre-sentencing investigation, the arguments of the state and the arguments of the defense. Court pronounces sentence as follows. Ms. Boone, court sentences you to life in the Department of Corrections.
There was no gasp from Sarah, no shock. Instead, she stared straight ahead, her face as blank as it had been throughout most of the trial. But in her eyes, there was a flicker, a momentary hint of realization. This was the moment she'd feared. The consequences of her actions were no longer in question. Sarah Boone would now face life in prison without the possibility of parole. The finality of those words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with the weight of the life that had been lost and the irreversible path that Sarah had set herself on. As Sarah was led away, shackled and silent, the room buzzed with murmurs. Some found solace in the conviction, knowing that justice had been served.
I'm sorry. Words do not define my shame, and I don't know what else it is that I can say and convey to the Torres family how this happened. The ifs and whys and how really don't matter. It happened, and I'm sorry.
She recounted the litany of evil deeds and mistreatments that he perpetrated upon her. She's the victim of George Torres' family. She's the victim of the police. She's the victim of social media. It's all about Sarah Boone. Everything's about Sarah Boone, about how she is the victim.
As Sarah was escorted from the courtroom, her future was sealed. What happened on that fateful night will continue to stay in the hearts of those who loved Jorge Torres. And as for Sarah, she would have to come to terms with the reality of her actions in a prison cell, wondering if she would ever truly find peace with herself. The story of Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres is one of love turned toxic, a bond that began with promise but ended in unimaginable tragedy. Jorge's death and Sarah's conviction paint a haunting picture of how a relationship filled with passion and conflict can descend into chaos. It's a stark reminder of the thin line between love and destruction, and how unchecked pain and anger can lead to irreversible consequences. As their story closes, we're left with a lingering question. Could this tragedy have been prevented, or was it destined from the start? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. And that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling true crime stories.